let's get started. And that 100 build configurations is going to be a big deal when you see some of the new stuff that's available, because you'll want to be doing a lot more with build chains or pipelines, and that's where it becomes invaluable to have the extra build configurations, because you can start to do some advanced things and not need to mash everything into a single build in your, well, with whatever you're doing. It's not just CI, but deployments and everything else. So I want to start out and probably talk about the Docker support first. Obviously, in the past, you could do plenty of things with Docker and TeamCity, and it's one of my favorite ways to set up a CI environment, because really it simplifies everything about managing software on the build agents. But its latest release of TeamCity adds official integration that was available in a plugin before, but it's now bundled inside of the 2017.2 release, so that you can basically have first-class support with Docker, and TeamCity understands Docker, and that makes your life a lot easier when you're setting things up inside of TeamCity, and allows you to do some more complicated things with, I would say, a lot less configuration or code at the end of the day. So I'm going to hop over to my demonstration environment, and will someone just give me a heads up if this looks okay and you guys see my screen?
Yeah, Wes, looks good. One thing I forgot to mention is that we take questions. Please use the questions panel in your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be answering them as we go. We'll answer them in a written form, and we might read out some of the questions out loud. And after the webinar is done, and we'll publish it in our blog, and we'll have the answers to the most frequently asked questions there as well. That's it from me.
Sounds good. Yeah, please ask away. Those will probably get answered while I'm working on some things, and we'll try to answer some as we go. One of the things I wanted to point out with regards to the 100, in addition to just being helpful for setting up some more advanced build configurations or deployments, it's also great for learning. I don't know if any of you have taken the time to try to set up a bunch of different build configurations. I know I have with all the demonstrations I do. And it's really nice to not have to hit that 20 threshold and try to clean up some old builds. I can just kind of leave them there. You can see I've got 7 already used from my preparation for today. So it's a nice threshold for learning as well. All right. So the first thing I want to show is how you can build an image, a Docker image with TeamCity. And of course, like I said, you could always in the past just shell out to the Docker CLI, and that works. But now when you are creating a build configuration, and I'm sitting inside of a webinar project today, I'll create a couple of sub projects for this. So I'm going to create a sub project and a build configuration all at the same time. I'm going to use a repository that I have out on GitHub. This is a .NET Core application, so we'll use this later on today when I talk about the .NET CLI support. For now, I'll use this as well with some Docker examples, so you kind of see a mix of both worlds. So this is your traditional setup that you're used to. This particular repository has a Docker file at the root of the repository right here. That'll come into play in a moment when TeamCity sniffs through that code base and guesses at what perhaps I want to add to my build configuration. For now, it's suggesting a couple of names based on the repository, typical things. I'm going to say this is an image build here, just to emphasize that. And then I'll click proceed here. So I want this particular build configuration to produce a Docker image at the end of the day. So instead of your traditional artifact that might be nuanced to .NET, for example, might be a NuGet package or maybe a zip file, versus Java land with maybe a jar file or a WAR file. Instead of having these individual different artifact types, the nice thing about Docker is we have images as our distribution mechanism now. So it doesn't matter what you're developing with, you could be spitting out an image with your source code or your compiled application inside of it. And that makes it really easy to get your app up and running. So that image is your new artifact, your new packaging format. So now that TeamCity's run through this particular repository, again, out on GitHub, it's found this Docker file as well as other things. And it's making some suggestions to me for auto-detected build steps. And if you just glance through the list, you'll see probably a bunch of new things in here. The .NET CLI support that we'll talk about is up there later on. There is some Docker Compose support, which we'll get to. The one I want is this Docker build step. And you can see it's pointing at the Docker file in the root of the repository. let me know if that font size is problematic for anybody. I'll go ahead and just click Use Selected as is typical. So that adds that build step then. And if I were to click into it, I can see some of the details about what it's set up. It's pointed at the Docker file. It's adding a pull argument to pull the image, check for updates. But otherwise, I can just go ahead and I believe I'm ready to click the Run button now. I'll get to tagging this in a moment. I just want you to see that this kicks off and actually rather quickly because I've built this particular image before. This kicks off a Docker build, and you can actually see the output here from Docker build with various different container layers that are used. And at the end of the day, we created that image. However, we have not tagged it. So I'll come back to the configuration settings for that. And this is your typical, I need to add some arguments to whatever program I'm running. In this case, it's the tag argument, basically, that you're passing. And in this case, I will, what do I want to do with this? I'm actually going to tag this with an internal registry that I have. So because I want to push this out to a registry. There's a typical workflow at the end of the day when you're working with Docker, you'll want to push your images out to one of your Docker registries so that you can then pull it from just about anywhere. And you can see, as usual, I can include the build number in the tag for the image. And then I've got the rest of the repository here on the left-hand side, including the registry this is going to. Put whatever you want in here. The nice thing is you can use environment variables and build arguments to make this reusable so you don't have to copy and paste this all over the place. So I can click Save there on that, and that will now tag the image when I run this. Give that a second. Successful build here, and in the build log you can see we've got our image tag this time, including at the very end there, and that's a little bit small to see. I'll zoom in a little bit for you. You can see that the build number was used there with a 2 on the end. So that's the workflow for building an image. It's pretty easy. I might want to push this out somewhere. To do that, I'm going to add just a command line step in this case. You can mix and match. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, TeamCity will look at what's going on both in the official, official build steps, you could say, that come from the bundled plugin. It'll also look at what's going on in your command line scripts with Docker, so it understands both worlds, not just the build steps that are bundled. So I could just do a Docker push here, and then again, I need to refer to that. I need to refer to my image again that I created, the tag that I'm adding. So I'm actually going to change this now and use an environment variable. Your scheme may vary, but I'm going to add an environment variable called tcBuildImage now that I need that Docker push that image again here. I don't want to type all that out again, internal registry, blah, 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 blah. I'll forget that and make a mistake. So I will just make an environment variable quick, save that. I will take that environment variable, copy that actually, and I will come over to my build step for my Docker build, and we'll put this in here instead. What did I do here? I probably should have defined it first. That's usually better. Image underscore tag. So I'm going to use the same value in both places now with an environment variable. Come over to the parameters tab. I can set the value for that now. Now that's a little bit more reusable. I can change the value here, and this is really nice. You might change your registry, might want to change the repository or even your tagging convention, and you can now do that all from one spot. For example, I might want to add like a C, maybe I want to add a CI dash on the front to indicate this is a CI build, not a release candidate, for example. Now when I run all of this, takes a smidge longer because we're going to push something out. 2 steps here. The Docker build uses my new tag format, CI-3 in this case, because it's a 3rd build. And then under the command line, you can see a push happened. And if I come out to my registry here, you can see we now have the generator repository and CI-3. And if I run this again, you'll see another image is going to show up. And I'm just kind of stepping through this slowly because I want this workflow to sink in a little bit. So just imagine if every single time you're Docker image build kicks off in TeamCity. You push that image out to your repository somewhere, maybe a private registry, maybe a public registry, maybe Docker Hub. At the end of the day, you have this whole build history sitting out there. You could pull any past version of your application, even a CI build if you want, depending on your cleanup policy, and you could then be running that application on any computer, and that's really valuable, especially for troubleshooting. Now you have the entire environment available to you. You don't even have to set up an environment. You can just Docker run and pull your image, and it's just extraordinarily powerful what you can do with that. This is the start of the support, is the build step for Docker build. There's also a build feature, and if I add this build feature, it's the Docker support build feature. This will allow me to, for example, say, hey, TeamCity, I want you to watch the images that I'm creating and pushing. So basically the ones I'm pushing out to my registry, watch those for me. And TeamCity does some magic with Docker events to watch what's going on during the build to correlate back to your build. And then it can clean up those pushed images according to your cleanup policies in TeamCity. You can also choose to log into a Docker registry if you provide a connection, and this is your typical connection in TeamCity. I am not going to set up a authenticated connection today, but you can do that. All you do is, like anything else, add your username and password. TeamCity will keep that safe then, and then you can just select that in the list here. And then in front of your build process, before any of your steps run, TeamCity is going to log you in, and when the build's done, TeamCity is going to log out of that registry. So you could use then any command line commands that you might want as well, in addition to the Docker build step, and you'll be authenticated for all of that, which is very convenient. I'll leave that off though for today. Just adding this Docker support feature now, when you run a build, TeamCity picks up more of this information. So now this is where TeamCity is doing an analysis with Docker events, and we can see that if we come into the build log and take a look at the verbose output here, you'll see some grayed out messages, some very light gray messages. And let me zoom in a smidge, and I'll zoom back out when I'm done. And you can see we have, there we go, where the monitor has started here, looking at Docker events. And if I come into, for example, the Docker build, here you go, you can see a Docker event that was correlated to pull an image. And I believe this is cached, so some things won't show up because I'm not really doing everything here with the build cache in Docker. And then you can see another Docker event was captured here. So TeamCity is just watching the Docker events while your build is running. And that means, let me zoom out. When I come back to the here we go, it's right here. I now have a new Docker info tab as well. So you can see this Docker info tab. If I go back to number 4 before I added Docker support, there's no Docker info tab. So that's what the Docker support does. One of the features, it adds this tab here to keep track of whatever it discovered inside of your build process. So whatever you're doing, the events that are correlated, they're going to show up here. And this is the beginning of what is used by TeamCity to keep track of, for example, images that you're pushing. I do have a small bug in my demo environment. I haven't been able to get the image push to recognize, but that's a feature you'll see when you come in here and try this out. You'll see the image push as well. You can see down here, TeamCity is successfully detecting the images that I'm using. So this is the dependency part where you can go and look at an application build and say, hey, okay, here are the images that it's dependent upon, if you want that high-level overview without going perhaps into your Docker files to find that information out. So short of coming in here and looking through and understanding a Docker file to understand what exactly is being used. All right. Any questions? I'm just going to pause for a brief second.
Yes, there are a couple of questions, actually. Some of them are already answered. So one of the questions that has not been answered yet is from Ivica. So anyway, it goes like this. Why not do Docker push as part of the step that builds the tags and tags the image?
Absolutely. So I'm not aware of that as an option here yet. I was kind of wondering if that might come in the future as well. I don't know about that, though. I'm going to have to defer that question to somebody that knows more about the roadmap, or if that's a feature I'm just unaware of. But I think it's not bundled with the Docker build step right now.
All right. The other one is, what exactly a build image? what exactly is a build image?
What is a build image? So I would assume this is coming from someone who's not familiar with Docker. When I say build image, maybe I was also confusing somebody. I'm talking about just a Docker image at the end of the day. So when I have my, I think, where did I put that name at? I have it up, image build up here. So we're just creating an image now instead of maybe a zip file. So if you're not familiar with Docker, an image, you should just really think of it as a zip file. Really is at the end of the day. It has your application inside of it. It also has pretty much your entire set of operating system dependencies inside of it. It's an entire environment, if you will, almost like a VM image in a way, is a good way to think of it. But it's really just the same thing you would have at the end of the day as a zip file if that's how you were packaging up your application. So this could say zip build, and it would be about the same thing in the old way of doing things for an application build. All right.
Yeah, one more question from Lee. Is it possible to create multiple tags during the Docker build step, or do I need to build multiple times?
As far as I know, don't think I've actually tried that one out, but yeah, like you can, yeah, it's tags actually. So you can just put in just like here, it says down here in the help, a new line separated list of the image name tag pairs. So yes, you can add more than one here.
Yeah, Josh was also asking about our plans to support Docker as a cloud provider. Josh will just answer in line and send you a couple of links to the plugins, to the cloud provider plugins for TeamCity. Yeah, I think that's it for the questions at the moment. We can continue with more questions a bit later.
All right. So again, maybe one thing that might help people anchor themselves into the Docker world better would be to let's do a Docker image ls here, and I'm creating the internal dash registry. We can just kind of monitor this if we want throughout this webinar and see what we're creating. I have some old stuff out here. I apologize. There's some old demonstrations from last night, but you can see CI dash, that's new from today. So we CI3, CI4, CI5, though it is hitting a build cache that is old. But yeah, so here are your images that we're building on the build agent. And then we also have a web UI to a registry, a private registry. And you can see the list continues to grow here. I wish that Google would never translate this site. There we go. Again, running any of these Docker official Docker components in TeamCity, the build steps, the Docker support, necessitates your agent actually having support for this. So let's close up a few things here. You can click on your agent if you're curious about this to find out what is supported. You'll have compatible configurations as one route to go to see if the build config that you are setting up actually works, and it does in this case, or incompatible. You can find out why. Or under agent parameters, if you come over to configuration parameters, you'll see some Docker configuration parameters here. And this is basically TeamCity fingerprinting your build agent, just like in server, perhaps as well, for the Docker server side of things. It's just fingerprinting on the build agent like usual, like any other tool, to sniff out what is available, what versions are available, so you can use this then as a part of your maybe agent requirements, or you can use this information to know that your agent is properly set up or not properly set up if for some reason your Docker builds don't work because of an incompatibility. This works, my understanding is the support is for Linux, if Docker, of course, is installed on your Linux environment. Windows with Windows containers, but not Linux containers. And I could be misspeaking. That was the last understanding I had, but Windows with Windows containers. And then Docker for Mac on a Mac with Linux containers would work. So pretty wide support for Docker in quite a few different environments there. Next one is a next piece of Docker support. And I really like this one because this is a really neat way to start thinking about how you manage software on your agents. And so it's this idea of a Docker wrapper. And I'm going to come into my project settings here, and we're probably going to I think I want to set up a new project here. Yeah, what I want to do is separate from this image build to avoid any confusion. So I want to create a new build configuration here. And we're just going to call this one. We're going to use the same repository, I believe. And in this case, let's just say traditional build, maybe. This will show the value of I guess, more of a traditional build versus a newer build. And I'm going to skip and configure things manually. I want to just come into a command line step. So I think it's pretty common. I've done it a lot in the past to have a build script or to have some sort of file that's checked into version control, and I can specify that file then. It's pretty common to maybe check that into version control, just have a script instead of setting everything up in all of the UI in TeamCity where you click through things and put the values in. That's great. But sometimes it's nice to also have a script that you already use in version control and just plug it in and go, right? So if you are doing that, you might be inclined to want to have some software available to you inside of that build script. And in the past, that means installing all this software on your build agent. So the build's going to run all of your different components. They all have to be there. So maybe Java, maybe .NET Core, maybe the .NET Framework on a Windows agent. You have a lot of stuff you have to cram onto a machine. Maybe multiple versions of some of these pieces of software too. You might need 10 different JDK versions and, I don't know, 10 different .NET Core SDK versions. And that becomes a nightmare to manage. And of course, we have all kinds of conflicts that can happen. But what if instead of doing all of that, what if we didn't have to install anything but your TeamCity agent and Docker onto one of your build agents? And that's it. What if that was the two pieces? And then you would just come in and you perhaps would choose to run something within a Docker container. So you get your tools, if you will, from a Docker image instead of having to install them on the build agent. So for example, there is a Microsoft ASP.NET Core -build. This is an SDK image for the 2.0, for .NET Core 2.0, ASP.NET Core 2.0 actually. So I can just say, hey, I want to use this image that's provided by Microsoft. I know it's good. And I want to run, let's just run .NET help. So this is the .NET CLI here, the traditional manual way. I'm going to put that into the script. And let's just say I know that I want to use version 2.1 of the SDK, and on my build agent here, I have 2.0 of the tooling. So let's come over and we'll run the same .NET help over inside of TeamCity using this image provided by Microsoft, and we'll see what version we have then. So just that easy. Add a command line step, put in your program that you want to run, .NET in this case, it could be Java, it could be whatever. Specify the image that you want to base things on, and click the Run button. Give this a second here, and in the build log, take a look at that. Let me zoom in a smidge here. You can see we're using version 2.1.3 of the tooling. So if I needed 2.1 in the traditional world, I would need to come install it onto my build agent here because it doesn't have 2.1, it has 2.0. And maybe then I also need 1.0 and 1.1 and maybe JDK, I don't know, 1.8, 1.7, whatever it might be. I need all these different versions and they conflict with each other and it's a nightmare to manage. Well, now what if it was just as easy as specifying the image that has the version that you need when you are setting up a script, for example, and then forgetting about it? I think that's wonderful. So now basically you could just go back to all your old build scripts and you can containerize them by virtue of just specifying the image that they need to run inside of. And if you have different tools, well, you could have 2 or 3 of these build steps that run different tools. So I could have Java and a Java image in the next build step, and then I'll have the Java CLI available to me. It's pretty powerful. And if you're familiar with how image tagging works, if I hop out to Docker Hub and take a look at this particular series of images that Microsoft publishes, I can just come out here to the tags and you can see all the different version numbers that I could possibly have available to me. So if I wanted to jump back to maybe 2.0.3, I could do that. or maybe 1.1.4. In fact, let's try that and see if I can break things today. Let's do 2. No, let's do 1.1.4 and see what breaks. So now there's a different version. Let's run that. And if I go to the build log here, see, the sky's the limit here. I didn't even think about this before when I was prepping this demo. And hey, looks like we're pulling down the image because I don't have it right now. So this one will take a little bit longer the first time. But once it's pulled down to the agent, it'll be there forevermore. Unless, of course, I clean up images on the agent. So unless I run out of space, I can keep all these different tool versions without needing to actually install them on the agent. Docker takes care of that for us. TeamCity then basically is this transparent wrapper around Docker so that you can just specify an image and a script and go, which is super cool. That's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of magic happening behind the scenes to make it easier for you to just use the software that you need at the end of the day. I'll open up for maybe one question while this is running here.
Looks like the majority of questions have been answered already.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we will let that finish. And while that's going, it's not just for getting the help either. So if I come into my traditional build here and I'm going to edit the settings in a separate tab, this is not just a neat way to see what the latest version is or what version is used by this image. I could also put in a .NET test call here. And in this particular project, there is a test folder with a test project, so I'll target that. So this would be a typical .NET CLI call, just with the command line script. I'll update that, see if this is done now. Nope, a little bit slow to pull that down. So I could actually be calling something more robust than just a help command. Very powerful. So if you just start thinking about what it would mean if you didn't have to install software on your build agents anymore, other than TeamCity, agent, and Docker, so that you have that platform available to you to run anything. And then what if you could just say, hey, I need Java whatever, I need .NET Core whatever, I need Python whatever. And you just needed to specify what you need and the version you need, and you don't need to worry about how to install it anymore. That's what's possible now. And it's a very easy workflow to set up here with this Docker wrapper. See, that's finished now. Yeah, okay. Here we go. Big reveal. Hey, it works. So we've got 1.1.4 now. So if I needed that for a legacy application, I could use that without conflicting with 2.0 or even worrying about any of that. But the good thing is I can actually run something realistic here. I'll run the latest settings with the .NET test in it and come to the build log here. And in a moment here, we should see the test kick off. Though I think I left the wrong version. Yeah, this isn't going to work with 1.1.4. We'll just quickly fix that. So I'll just specify generically the latest 2.0 release. And that's running now. Okay, so the next, and one more thing, while this is running, since take a second, this doesn't just apply to the command line, this wrapper, this Docker wrapper that's provided by TeamCity now. And let me zoom out a little. So I added this via the command line just by coming in and saying, you'll see a Docker settings section, and there are some options as well. You can, for example, pass some arguments. But this Docker settings section shows up in more than one place. It's not just a command line. You could also be using Ant. So the Ant build step. So if you like this if you like this form to fill out, which I really do, then you'll see there's, here we go. Here are the Docker settings. So you could provide Ant in this case via a Docker image, which is just wonderful. You could also do this with Maven, if I can find it. There we go. You'll see under advanced options, Docker settings here. So anywhere you see Docker settings under a build step means that whole whatever it is you're specifying, Maven in this case, is going to be executed inside of the image that you specify. So you can control the version then with a Docker image. Super cool. So, and I suspect we will see this pop up in other build steps in the future. So I would keep an eye out for this if you're not a Java developer, for example, doing Ant and Maven development. I suspect we will see this pop up in other places. Correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but it's just kind of basically saying under the hood, go ahead and run this with an image instead of on the agent itself. I'm going to come over and check on my, hey, there we go. We've got our 2 tests passed now because I called .NET test from the CLI. I can even see those tests. And over in the build log, if I wanted to, I could drill in to actually see what was going on and the output from that testing process. But the good thing at the end of the day is this is not just a fluffy, check the version of your tooling. This is actually using the tooling. And TeamCity mounts your working directory into that container that it creates. So that little environment that sits out there with your one tool that you need, it puts all your checkout directory or your working directory, puts it all over there for that tool to use. That tool can do anything it wants. It can take source code in, it can spit out artifacts, and all of that's going to come back to your working directory when that tool is done. So you have available your entire set of source code, and you can grab artifacts out of that tool, all transparently. It's almost as if it's running on the build agents. Very cool feature. All right, let's move on. And I want to talk about one of the last big areas that I like of the Docker support. Come back over here. And I'm actually going to add a new build. Same repository. Later on, I'll show you how you can make your life a little bit easier than copying and pasting this thing all the time. The repository URL. So make a new repository, new build configuration this time. This one's going to be integration testing. In this case, I want to link back to my image build. So I want you to start to get into your head that if you build an image, you then might take that image and run a container based on it that spins up a testing environment. And if you do that, you're going to want to use the exact image that you built for a given change set in version control. You won't want to test version. You won't want to build an image for version A or commit A and then test commit B. That wouldn't make sense. So your traditional snapshot dependency in TeamCity back to the image build means that the integration testing can then share that same image. You can start to see a build chain form here. So you have our image build. After that, we'll run our integration testing, and we want them to operate on the same change set and version control. Over in the build steps for this one, I want to show off one last build step that I really like. You can do auto detect for this. Saw this earlier with Docker Compose. So TeamCity's Docker support includes Docker Compose support. And down at the bottom, you can see some suggestions here. Actually, quite a few because my repository has lots of YAML files in it that are used for Docker. I'm going to choose this last one here, the integration testing. I can show you that briefly if you'd like to see that. So I've got a Docker Compose file. It's a little bit bigger here. And this has a generator service that's based on the image that I created before. You'll notice that environment variable. Maybe that looks familiar from that last image build step. That's the environment variable from that. So we'll reuse the same image that we created. And I'll show you how to link that together here with a parameter in a moment. This also sets up a mail server, a testing email server, SMTP, and then it runs an integration test that actually makes sure that a request to the API sends an email to the mail server and that the mail server actually receives that email. It's a whole end-to-end integration test. It's very cool. And of course, this is easy stuff with Docker because you can spin up lots of different private environments with different software running inside of them and get that software to easily network and talk to each other. That's what the beauty of Docker Compose, and TeamCity understands that as well. So I will come back over to TeamCity now, and we've got our Docker Compose set up. There's not a lot of options in here right now. I suspect we'll see some more in the future, maybe some parameters we can pass, or maybe even a compose file that you could paste in. I don't know, I suspect. But here is the file that I have pointed at in the repository. So I need to somehow specify in that Docker file these environment variables that Docker is using. I need to get those to Docker. That's where the parameters will come into play. And the first thing I want to do is define an environment variable here. And this one is going to be the, and I'll just copy them to save some time here. I need to set that TC build image tag. And I'm going to point that. This is the wonderful thing here. Now that I've linked things together, I can point that back up the build chain and say, hey, make sure you use that environment variable from the image build. That way we're not copying and pasting that value down an entire build pipeline or build chain. So I can save that then, and I'll add another parameter. This one is for the integration testing image tag. So you could also be tagging each integration image in Docker you build. You can build those as well, and we'll be doing that in a moment. You could be pushing those to your registry and have a whole tagging convention for that, and it'd be great to not copy and paste that everywhere. This one is going to be internal registry, and 5,000 in this case, my private registry generator, and I'll do just integration here, maybe int to have it be different than those other ones that I have set up, and build.number in this case. So I'll specify those two values. These are how we're basically, these are the images we're going to use. That's a long story short if any of that was confusing for you. And I've got my build set up, my Docker Compose. Let's just run this and see what happens. It'll probably break. I'm probably missing something. So TeamCity in this case is actually running the services and the Docker Compose file. The intent of this build step is to start up a series of services that you can then use in subsequent build steps however you see fit. And then you'll notice here, so if I drill into the Docker Compose step, you'll see TeamCity is starting the Docker Compose services. You can actually see the command that it's running here. It's just a Docker Compose up with the file that I provided. It's detached though, so it's not going to sit here and wait for these to print out information forever. It's just starting them up, and then down below somewhere here, oh, I think I need to turn on the verbosity level. Turn it up. You turn it up, you can see TeamCity actually looks to check if this particular container has health status, and if it does, it'll wait until the service is healthy. So a really neat way to make sure that your service is not just started, but healthy and operational. And then imagine just using this to do anything you want. I'm not doing anything here, but you could put any build step you want in, and then TeamCity stops the services at the end of the build. So this is similar to logging in and logging out to the Docker registry. In this case, we're starting Docker containers at the start of a build, and we're stopping them at the end of the build. And you can do whatever you want with them in between. And there's a lot of magic that happens so that if you use that Docker wrapper with all of this, the containers you create can talk to these services without needing to set up any custom networking. It's very cool. I don't have anything set up other than that one build step. Let's come back to that. And I actually have inside of this build step, let me come back to that thing. I actually run the integration test right here. So probably what you might see and what this Docker Compose build step is really more meant for, you start up your services like these two at the top, my API and my mail server. I would start those up, and I probably would run my integration tests separately. Nothing wrong with putting them in the Docker Compose file because you can run them all together. Because I did that though, I don't have another build step to add to the mix here. But I could do something like add a build step here if I want to, and I could just wait. I believe I can wait for that integration test set to complete, and I can grab the logs for it. Actually, this is a cheap way based on this simple setup I have here to grab the test output, and then I can save this. This will allow me to at least wait for the testing to complete in my integration test runner. Otherwise, these are in a way asynchronous services. They start up. You do whatever in the middle with this is your integration test right here. I should even call it that integration test. Whatever you do in here, once it's done, TeamCity tears down those services. It doesn't care where they're at in the process. It's not waiting for them to exit gracefully. It's going to tear them down for you. It does that with a Docker Compose down. So make sure you add your step in here to run whatever testing you want. So a nice workflow, actually, if you have maybe you need an Nginx server, or maybe you need a mail server like this Mailhog server that I'm using. You could start that up here, kick off your integration tests, And then when you're done, TeamCity would tear down those services for you. When I come back here, build 1 didn't have any test results. Now when I run this, because I'm going to wait for the testing to complete, and I'm going to grab the logs in this case, I should actually see the test results. Any questions?
Quite a number of questions, actually, but they're all being handled promptly.
Okay. Great.
Yep.
All right, let's move on. One last note, as far as disk space on the agent itself, as a last resort, if your agent starts running out of disk space, you might be wondering, well, what about all these images that we're creating, right? I think right now I've got a lot already. You could imagine this list is going to grow over time. Now, these are in Docker lands. A lot of this is not duplication. It's just aliases or pointers. But you can actually start to build up a lot of history if you're actually building a new image every time somebody changes code. Well, TeamCity's free disk space build feature, if you enable that and you're starting to run low and it can't clean up enough space or you don't have enough space, as a last resort, TeamCity can do a prune of everything in Docker. It's something you'd have to turn on with that free space build feature, but it's there if you're curious about how you might go about cleaning up images. You don't need to necessarily clean those up yourself on the agent itself. So that's on the agent, the image cache or build cache versus your registry. Those are 2 separate cleanup, I guess, worlds. Need to be handled differently. All right, that is probably where I want to stop for Docker support. Let's go back actually though and see if that worked. Yeah, there we go. We've got our 1 test passing. So that's the end of the Docker support, unless there are any questions about that. You can see right here the integration test ran. All of this test output, and now then at the end we tear everything down. So that's the intent of that. All right. Let's move on. Oh, and by the way, what I've shown today is not all of the Docker support. Like as was mentioned, there's a plugin, I believe that's being actively developed. I don't know if it's not bundled yet, but there's a plugin that's being developed where you'll have cloud support for running your agents inside of Docker containers. So that's a separate world. And look for new features to be coming in this official Docker integration. And there's stuff I couldn't even cover today. So there's a lot more here. I just wanted to kind of touch the icing on the cake. I want to move on now to talking about the .NET CLI. So what I want to do first for this, since I've already actually run some .NET Core project here, I want to come back up to the top level and we'll just be working. So I have these first build configurations set up. I'm going to kind of sweep those under the rug now, and I want to use a separate project. And we will be creating a new project for that. So I'll call this one, we'll just call this .NET CLI for fun. Oops, and I'll do manually on that. I'll basically kind of create a folder here. And in this case, I'm going to start by just setting up and showing you the new .NET build step. Kind of like the Docker build step, you have new .NET CLI build steps. And if I create a build configuration, actually judging by time, I kind of want to merge 2 features into 1, but I won't because I think I'll confuse people. Okay, so let's see here. We have the repository as is usual. And in a moment here, you'll see that TeamCity is auto-detecting. It's scanning the repository. It's going to auto-detect the various different .NET steps that I might want to use. This is a separate repository, so different auto-detect here. I can, for example, do a .NET build just by ticking the box. And let's also do a .NET test. And that's going to be, well, no, that's the whole solution. I don't want that. So we'll do a .NET build of the whole solution, and I'll go and add the testing later. You can come in here and look at what you're used to as far as setting up a .NET build. In this case, a .NET CLI build. You have all the various different options, and TeamCity is really neat. It sniffs out these values from your project file, your CSproj file. This is .NET Core land. And configuration values. You don't have to remember these things. TeamCity can sniff these out for you, which is really helpful if you're going to be setting up different parameters. I will save this though and leave the defaults here. And I should just be able to hit a run button, I hope. That's kicking off. And of course, In a moment, we'll have a build successful here. So this is a nice set of wrappers around the .NET CLI, so that you don't have to just, so that your only option is no longer the command line script or some plugin that you download. This is official support bundled in now for a set of .NET CLI build steps. And you can see the .NET build is kicking off here in the various different applications that are a part of this eShop on web. This is a Microsoft sample project. There are various different projects in here that are getting built. And here's your .NET CLI output that you're used to. All right, it's not just building though. As we saw a moment ago, we can test, and we can test on the level of the solution, but we can also just come in and manually add a .NET CLI build step. And then you can pick the sub command here from a list. So instead of having separate build steps, this one is a list of sub commands that you can select, and then the options will change down below. And in this case, I want to just run the unit tests. Pretty typical to not run all the tests as a part of your build that kicks off every time somebody checks in. So let's just do unit test project only. And I got that nice tree view experience to drill into my files for my project to pick what I want. Again, options are up here. There's even code coverage with .cover. Once I add that, then the name is kind of generic, so I might actually come in here and do .NET build to help you out. Helps me out anyways. And this one we'll do .NET test. All right, so we've got a build and .NET test here. Now when I run this, I'll have the testing output. And of course, I can watch this, and then just like in the past, you have your real-time output from your build, whether that's an error in the build or a test result coming back. You can monitor your builds like you're used to. Now you have this nice wrapper around .NET Core. And then in the build log, we can come in and we can actually have the tree view here, live tree view of the different build steps. In this case, doing build here. Now we're doing .NET test here. Here's the testing output. And that'll take a second. I believe that's a little bit slower. If someone wants to ask a question, go ahead. All right. And as usual, everything collapses down for you with .NET build, .NET test, so you can easily drill through your build log. So it's pretty easy on a high level. If I jump out here and show you, we have our build now, our traditional .NET build here using the .NET CLI. So I have left Dockerland if any of this is confusing. And then, of course, all of this necessitates your agent actually having the .NET CLI on it. So TeamCity sniffs that out. If you come over to the agent tab, look at your agent. Again, come over and you'll find various different parameters that indicate to you what's available. So here's the .NET CLI version 2.0. It sniffed this out. Here's the location of it. And here's the 1.0 and 2.0 SDK. So TeamCity knows things about .NET Core that you would know if you're a .NET Core developer. And it's looking for those tools for you, fingerprinting, just like with Docker. And then making that available for agent requirements or just to confirm that you set up your agent properly. Also, you have compatible configurations is a good way to know what's working and what's not. All right, so that's added. That's just the very beginning of what I would like to set up. So I separated out of the tests. You can see 17 have passed here. There are a few more integration tests in this project. So I want to add another integration test runner or build, whatever you'd like to call it. And instead of this old process where I was copying this every time, I want to show you a new way that can speed things up. It's a new alternative when it comes to templating your builds. A couple of things. In the past, we've had project level settings as a means of sharing configuration between different builds. So the project you could imagine is a tree, and you could set things at the root level, at the sub-project webinar in this case, or even in the .NET CLI sub-project, and it would just kind of like, I guess, trickle down to the nodes beneath it. That was one route to go, but that kind of constrained you to organize your projects and share settings the same way. We've also had templates in the past, a single template, and now with 2017.2, you can have multiple templates. I like to think of these as mix-ins. If you're familiar with this, is basically multiple inheritance for your build configurations. If you're a veteran TeamCity person, I you've probably heard of a meta runner. This is kind of like a meta runner in my mind. It's kind of like a meta runner, but for anything in the build configuration, not just the build steps, like was pretty common in the past. So this my level lifts that up to the level of compositional inheritance on the level of the build configuration. It's a brand new way to share settings at the end of the day. For example, maybe I want to create a template so I don't have to share that repository every time. I could just maybe call this the default template because it's a good way to reason about this. And in this default template, I'll establish the version control settings. eShop on web, yep. So I'll attach the VCS via the default template. I might also set maybe the build number format is unique. So maybe we have a common convention for the build number format. And maybe there's a typical set of artifacts that I want. Whatever your common settings are, or your base default settings are going to be the same across all of your different builds. It doesn't matter if it's testing or if it's compiling or if it's deploying. You can put that into a default template, and obviously version control settings will be one of those. So this template is like a little slice of a template now. It's like you just think of it like a configuration slice. So this default template just basically has the VCS in it and that build number change. I could have another template then with whatever I want in it. Maybe I have like a troubleshooting. This is what I was just thinking of in my mind, a troubleshooting template. And in this one, maybe I turn on the build feature for performance monitoring. There we go. Maybe I also want to report on free disk space. I can spell. I won't fail to build on it, but I'll report on it. This does bring up another point. Like there's sometimes on these build features, there are a lot of options. There's a Docker support, for example. What do you set these to, right? Like even if there's only 2 options, what are the values? And if you have to do this 4 or 5 times, that can lead to mistakes. Now you can set this up once as like a configuration slice or a template. And now if I hop back up, you'll see I have the default template. I have the troubleshooting template. Maybe I also want the Docker support. Remember I showed the Docker support earlier? This associates the correct cleanup policy, whether or not we want that, and then also the login to a given registry. Maybe I only want to set that once. So I create a Docker support template and I come to the build feature for that. And I add the build feature for Docker support completely separately. And in this case, maybe I just want to clean up. I don't want to log in. So for this project, I don't need logging in. So now I have all these little snippets, these little templates that I can take advantage of when I'm creating a new build configuration. So I don't have to duplicate all this information all the time. And one of the ways you can leverage this is to come up and set a default template. So I can come under here and say, hey, I want to set the one I conveniently called default template as the default template, because what else would be the default? So I can save that now. And that means that every single build that I create now will use that as the default template instead of nothing. And so in that case, it means they're going to have the version control settings without me needing to provide them. So let's go ahead and create that integration build that I was talking about, because I took a huge tangent here, but that's okay. I don't want to specify the repository URL. It's an old habit there. I just want to come under manually and create a build configuration. And I'm going to call this integration test. You could also be using these other integrations for picking a repository, but in this case, I'm doing manually because I want to let the defaults kick in from that template only. You can pick a template here as always in the past, but I won't pick anything. I'll let that default kick in. I can skip the VCS settings now. And look at that, I've got VCS added. So you can get into a workflow now where you set up a default template with the common things. You can even copy and paste that between builds in different projects. Maybe you could even share one default template across all of your projects. I don't know. The sky's the limit. It's a new way of inheriting settings outside of the project hierarchy and outside of a single template, because now you can see up at the top here that this is based on the default template. But I could also add in another template. So I can attach another template or associate another template. And I could pick, maybe I'm having problems with this integration test. So I want to turn on the troubleshooting template. So I could do that. Before I do that, I want to show you there's no build steps right now. No build steps. If I come up under actions and attach to template, and we do troubleshooting. sorry, no, build features is what I want to show. You can see that over on the left there. If I associate troubleshooting template, bam, I've got 2 build features. Like now I don't have to remember what build features I need for troubleshooting. And if somebody comes along after the fact in the troubleshooting template and says, hey, when you're troubleshooting, it would also be nice to see, I don't know, maybe we want .NET Help to run because that would help us see what version we're using. So we could add that in. So that might be a typical troubleshooting step is like, well, what version are you using of the software, or Docker version or whatever it might be. Then you could add those build steps in. And now by changing the template, I changed the template here. You can see the new build step was added to the template. Maybe I should call that .NET Help just so you can see that. Now when I come back up to the CLI level, then my project level, I'll come into my integration testing, which was based on that troubleshooting template. It's also based on the default template. Now you can see we have a new build step available. See that? So now I've got this build step added. And if once I'm done troubleshooting, I can go ahead and remove the template I don't need. So I can come in here and I can say, hey, I'm done troubleshooting this build. It's working fine now. Get rid of the troubleshooting stuff. And all of a sudden, should be, I guess it left behind one of the pieces. I can delete that when I'm done then. So I guess I can delete the pieces that I don't need at that point in time. Maybe this is not the best example of mix-in, but yeah, you can at least add the features in and then get rid of them when you're done if you detach. I don't know if there's a way to detach and get rid of the settings that were added, kind of like an opt-in and opt-out. Maybe that's not quite possible, but the sky's the limit, and you can provide your settings this way and not have to remember what all these different values are. For example, the version control settings. And then off you can go to add whatever custom build steps you need after the fact. And for example, I might want to run the tests that I was actually talking about. So I could run a test and a .NET test in this case. And in this case, I want to target getting back to my pipeline because I want to show one more thing here with the pipeline. I want to target the integration test. Save that. And now I need to add my traditional dependency. I want to form a pipeline now, so I'm going to switch gears here and talk about outside of the template land. I want to go back to talking about the pipeline because of some new features with aggregating results across a pipeline. So I'm going to come to the .NET CLI here, and I'm going to say, hey, run the integration test after building traditionally the .NET CLI. Here's my build chain, if that helps. So we have a build and then integration test, similar to what I had with Docker a moment ago. And then thinking if there's anything else I need, let's just go ahead and run this. I think that's all I need. This is kicking off then a build if necessary, and you can see the whatever -3. So that default template applies to everything. And then in a moment here, we will kick off our integration tests. And the important part, if I hop up a level here, I have a build chain started now. And you could imagine adding more and more and more steps or builds to this build chain. Your pipeline can continue to grow in complexity, especially now that you have 100 build configurations to use. And so this can get rather lengthy. You might also have parallel builds that happen to run different test sets in parallel. And you might have then noticed, if you have some more complex builds, that it can be hard to figure out what's going on from a high level. Like you can zoom into any piece. For example, I can see 17 tests pass here as a part of the build. And in a moment here, I'll be able to see the result of integration testing. I can see the status of it, at least at this point in time. But when you start to think about, like, what about the whole chain? Like, what are all the tests that ran? How long did the whole pipeline take? Those types of questions have been difficult because there's no way to really summarize across this build chain in the past, but now there is. Here's your one test pass with integration testing. So what if I want to just, for example, just see 18 tests, right? There's 17 here, there's 1 here. I want to just see 18. I don't care where they run in the pipeline. That's irrelevant to me if I care only about the test results. And if I care just about that, then I can come in. I'll come up to my project level. And I'm going to I'm going to create a build configuration here, except I'm going to create a composite build configuration. So there's a different button here. I am going to create this in the context of that default template. Might want to just be mindful if that would cause any problems. This won't in this case because I just have VCS settings. But this composite build is still a build at the end of the day. It's just a special build type. I'll show you in a moment. And then inside of here, I might say pipeline, or let's see, this is the eShop on web. So I might say eShop on web pipeline. And I might even call it like overview. Sometimes it's helpful to remember like this is the high level view. So I could also say 50,000 foot view. From here, when I'm creating this new type, so this is a brand new type of build. I suspect to see new types in the future. There's also a deployment type we'll get to in a moment, or at least I'll mention it now. I can come in then and I can say, hey, I want to include both of these different builds that are part of the build chain. So I'm going to grab the various different pieces I want to summarize. You don't have to summarize the whole build chain. You could just summarize a subset of it, whatever builds that you select. And this is using snapshot dependencies. So you're used to snapshot dependencies. If you've used that before, same thing under the hood. Create this. And you could do this in the past. You could create a build at the end that depends on everything and get some of this information, answer some questions. But then that would take up an agent, whereas this composite build type, and you can see that here. See how we have composite build type versus regular versus deployment? The composite type does not take up agent processing time. It does not take up license, whereas that past method would have. So this is the advantage here, is you get this summarization without wasting resources. And now I can come to the home page for this. You won't see a lot quite yet. Yeah, you're not going to see anything yet. Let's go ahead and run from our pipeline overview, which will run the whole pipeline. So you could just think of this as a pipeline trigger here now. It's going to trigger all of its snapshot dependencies. Oh, that was fast because we've already run this. So you can see the result right there. So this triggers the pipeline. So you get multiple runs of your pipeline going. As they're running, you can watch the progress of what's happening. For example, you can see the build, the integration tests here. These are all pre-run. But the important thing is, hey, here's that 18, right? Here are the 18 tests. I can see all of them together. I don't care that they're separated. I can also see that on the overview, test pass 18. Maybe if I jump up a level here, now I can see test pass 18. So this might be all I care about. Like maybe in this page here, I don't care about seeing all the details about these anymore. And maybe I just care about seeing this pipeline overview. And then so that on the project page is where I might want to come in and close out all the components of the pipeline because I don't care about them anymore. And here you can go to the build chains tab and you can actually see the pipeline. And this will show up, this composite build shows up on the end. So just as if you had added it on the end in the past, it's the same idea. So you can see what it controls. And if we do a run here and come to the dependencies and rebuild everything, this will take some time then. So we can control the whole build chain too, which is really neat. And speaking of, I can stop the whole build chain from this composite build and it'll stop all the builds. So you have complete control over that whole, it's like almost like a ability to reach in and control the whole pipeline or build chain. I can also get rid of the entire, the build result for the pipeline overview. Well, if I get rid of it, I'll get rid of everything then in the pipeline, all the results in the pipeline. Come to the history here. You can see this one was canceled. Come in here. Remove this. What do we have? Whatever 4 here. If you want to watch numbers wise. So we have whatever 4 on the build should be removed. All right, so I got rid of that whole pipeline. It's like the whole build chain was just thrown away. And then if I come back to the .NET CLI and look at the build, I guess that one didn't get rid of. Maybe I misunderstood that one. At least the overview is gone now, so the pipeline is no longer there. All right. So that's the composite build on a very high level. Actually, I do want to see. Look at my list here. Go ahead and ask any questions while I look at my list and make sure I covered all the things I want on this one. Oh, I hope I didn't lose you guys. Any questions?
Sorry, Wes. I think
No
most
problem.
of the questions, most of the questions are already answered. And did you
Great.
want to demo anything else?
Uh, what do we got on time? 10:10. We're way past. So no, let's not.
Yeah.
I think I'll just say that, there's some plugin management improvements for disabling and deleting plugins. For restarting the server is now available from the UI. So there's a couple of administrative niceties. Updating is now available. Oh, you can see, for example, here's a new update. So I could have tried updating this morning. So there's updates, or there's bundled auto update support, or at least the ability to keep track of it and download the update. And then there's also in the plugin list, there's the ability to disable and delete plugins. And when you upload it, it'll ask you to restart the server. You can see, for example, here I deleted one last night. So take a look at that. There's also a test drive in the cloud. If you want to try TeamCity out, just go to the TeamCity product page and click the test drive in the cloud. You can try TeamCity in the cloud without even needing to install it. And for DSL, Kotlin DSL people, if you're using your VCS settings and you're using Kotlin for that, you can now edit your settings in the UI, whereas it was read-only before. So that's a big improvement. Yeah, that's it. That's all I've got.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Wes. Thanks everyone for joining. As I mentioned, there will be a video recording published in our blog, so follow our blog and or Twitter. We'll announce there as well. As of right now, if there are any unanswered questions, we'll answer them and publish them along with the video recording. That should appear in our blog probably end of this week, beginning of next week, the latest. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Wes, once again, and thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, have a great day, everybody.
Bye.